Again, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our presentation on the Early Childhood Care and Education Capital Fund. We have a lot to cover, but first, to kick us off, I'm going to send it to Nicole Cello with the Department of Human Services.
Hi, everybody. It is nice to see each and every one of you here today. I am really excited to kick off this project. If you want to move to the next slide, we're just going to go over the agenda for today. During this presentation, we are going to be highlighting some of the important pieces of the grant process and also taking a walkthrough of the grant application itself. Some important pieces that our team here hopes to explain include the eligibility and priority criteria, requirements of the grant, how to use the online application, how the grant selection process will work, and where to go for technical assistance. If you'll move to the next slide. Through the establishment of the Early Childhood Care and Education Capital Fund, we here in Rhode Island are taking the necessary steps to expand quality early learning facilities within a mixed delivery system. Next slide, please. You might be asking why this program exists. The law establishing this program authorizes us at the Rhode Island Department of Human Services to administer grants for the improvement of existing early learning facilities, the expansion of existing learning facilities, and the creation of new early learning facilities. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about how high quality, affordable childcare is truly an essential factor for family economic stability. High quality childcare directly influences parents' ability to work and children's healthy development, as you all know on this call. And although it is essential, the high cost really does put this out of reach for many low-income families. And as you all know, a facility is really not just a place where the program is just sitting. It's part of the formula for success. Every child deserves equal access to affordable, developmentally appropriate, high-performing early learning facilities. Facilities projects continually face unique financing challenges. There's 4 different buckets that we talk a little bit about here. And while I won't go over every topic that's on this particular slide, the 4 main buckets include operator financials and a large variation within the industry. There are unique building requirements and appraisal challenges to particularly for childcare. Partnership opportunities and hurdles, such as mixed use projects, offer some of the highest potential for future childcare project development, but it can be really challenging to think about braiding that funding together. And also, lastly, but equally as important, project economics. Really, there is currently no dedicated federal source of funding for childcare facilities, and really very few state resources at this point. And a lot of projects, and I'm sure a lot of you on this call, do not have the ability to support really traditional debt models and require an infusion of grant or equity dollars. Next slide, please. Many of you probably remember the 2019 Rhode Island Early Learning Facilities Needs Assessment. This assessment was commissioned by the state of Rhode Island as part of its strategic planning process to really describe facility conditions, capacity, and challenges, and also provide actionable recommendations for improving quality and access in the state's early learning system. Recommendations for that included taking necessary steps to include an early learning facilities bond referendum on the ballot to voters, which was the most clear-cut way to access a large amount of capital needed to grow the system to scale and enable prioritized providers to make necessary improvements to infrastructure. As you can see, public support for this capital bond was super strong with over 66% approval. Rhode Islanders overwhelmingly voted, providing $13 million in grant funding for physical improvements to existing childcare spaces and for the development of new licensed early childhood spaces, which is really exciting. The rules and regulations for the voter approved ECE capital fund allowed DHS to partner with a qualified community partner to establish, administer, and oversee the program. DHS is partnering with our wonderful vendor, who I will currently hand this over to after that, the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, known to you all as LISC. At this point, I think this is where I hand it over to Erin.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much, Nicole. We are obviously incredibly excited to be at this point where we're talking about this program and to continue to partner with the Department of Human Services and to be here today to share this initiative. So quickly, who is LISC? Officially, we are a CDFI, which is a community development financial institution. And our goal is to help create vibrant and resilient places to live, work, learn, and play. We're a nationwide nonprofit headquartered in New York City with about 35-ish field offices around the country and growing. So what do we do? Well, the government, foundations, and for-profit companies have capital, and residents and local institutions understand community need. LISC bridges that gap by offering the relationships and the expertise to help community organizations attract the kind of resources that allow them to do their best work. LISC operates as an intermediary or pass-through entity. We receive our funding from banks, corporations, foundations, or in this instance, government agencies. We in turn use that funding to provide financing and technical assistance to local partners and developers who might otherwise not have access to those funds. We were contracted by the Department of Human Services to administer this facilities grant to the early learning community. And then funding, as mentioned before, comes from the proceeds of a general obligation bond that was dedicated specifically to this purpose and approved back in 2021. And for more than 2 decades, LISC has operated and supported the early care and education field. We provide capacity building, investments, technical resources. We focus on development of quality infrastructure, and we provide advocacy and opportunity through thought leadership. For over 20 years, we've operated and dedicated and staffed the Early Learning Facilities Fund in Rhode Island. So we've paved the way for centers to improve their facilities through specialized one-on-one technical assistance, created innovative financing, worked on public policy initiatives, and by sharing our expertise. We have invested over $28 million to over 250 early learning providers throughout the state. We have about 1,000 hours of dedicated technical support and capacity building to about 80 organizations on a year-to-year basis. We provide training that features leading experts, and we have nationally recognized resource materials. Plus, we have an online training portal as well. And then we've influenced and guided statewide policy and funding priorities to support and promote equitable access to quality early education throughout the state. So taking a quick pause, I just want to introduce the LISC team. So I am Erin Cox. I'm the Senior Program Officer here. We are also joined by Megan Ressler, Program Officer for the Child Care Facilities Fund, Jay O'Grady, Senior Program Officer for Lending and Capacity Building, Nati Tavares, our Assistant Program Officer for Program and Office Operations and Management, and Pauline Bellavance and Deanna Bruno, who are assisting the Child Care team. Our Executive Director is Jeannie Cola. So as we begin this program overview, we really want you to be thinking about what kind of space you want the children in your care to thrive in, and how a space can inspire and encourage learning. So we're going to scroll through just a couple of examples that might resonate with you to kind of kick us off and get us excited about some of these projects. And then we're going to ask an interactive icebreaker question in just a second. So take a look at these spaces and see, does it make you feel any certain way? Is it a space you want your kids to be in? Or is it something that you're striving for in your existing center? So now we're going to share a screen that shows you how to participate in an interactive icebreaker question. So again, there is a link in the chat that you can click on, and you can start to add some of the things that you would like to include in your space if you had unlimited resources. I love seeing that outdoor is popping up as one of the biggest words right now, which means more people are asking for that particular thing. You know, what we know, especially since 2020, is that fresh air is such an important aspect of the quality of your space and getting outside, not just from it's great to be in nature perspective, but it's so good from a health and safety perspective because it's one of the best ways to mitigate airborne illness. We're seeing space, like just having ample space. What we know is that 35 square feet per child is, you know, great and meets minimum requirements, but we could always use more space for that free roaming. I'm seeing light. I'm imagining light means both access to natural light and having good lighting systems in your space. I'm seeing opportunities for play. I'm seeing windows and shade. Now is where we get to the really fun part, where we start talking about how we're going to disperse this $13 million of funding. We have about $13 million available in matching grants to support early learning facility projects. Funds are intended to support greater access to safe, high quality early learning opportunities. That includes supporting technical assistance, along with planning and capital funding needs. Funds are available for a period of 3 years, starting in 2022 and ending in October of 2024. So here's a quick breakout. So we have roughly $13 million in grant funds. They're split up into 2 categories, and we'll talk about those more in a little bit. There is about $1.5 million for small grants for urgent health and safety, quality improvements, and reconfiguration of space. We anticipate this could benefit up to about 40 organizations and impact, you know, as many as 4,000 children annually. There are also larger grants for the development of new, high quality spaces that could include construction, major rehabilitation of vacant or blighted properties, and expansion to existing facilities. We expect this to support approximately 6 to 10 large projects that create new, high quality spaces for as many as about 1,500 children annually. And the set aside for that is roughly $11.5 million. Now, these amounts are just estimates, and they're flexible, and certainly it will depend on the applications that we receive. Quickly, just want to point out, for the home-based family child care providers on the call, we wanted to specifically call out the repair and the small-scale renovation pool of funding. This is what you should focus your applications on. While there is a pool for expansion, unfortunately, because these are public funds, we will be unable to fund home expansions through this program. So here we would like to share the current timeline through the end of this year. We are in May, June, July-ish timeframe right now. There was a formal review process for the bond regulations, and highlighted in purple is where we currently are. The preliminary regulation just became final regulation, and we are currently holding our info sessions. We're in the development of the program design and the guidelines. And we have been meeting with the DHS team for feedback and finalization. Come July and August, we will be launching the application. The program will kick off. The letter of intent and application will be launched, and we will always be announcing things via our e-news, through social media, and by leveraging our partner organizations. We will be providing ongoing technical assistance, and there will be trainings coordinated. So just as of right now, for any family childcare providers, we've actually uploaded our family childcare repair and renovation recorded session to our website in the event that you are interested in learning more about specific improvements that could be made to your family childcare space. And then come September, October timeframe, the first application wave will close and the grantees will be selected. So we will review applications and then we will present award recommendations. DHS, LISC, and a team will select grantees. We will notify our grantees, and we're hopeful that contracts can get started around the beginning of October. We will address this again kind of further along in the presentation, but just a quick note, complete applications that are received by August 18th of this year will be reviewed in September, with applicants notified by October. Future reviews may be scheduled and posted based on the funding availability after this first wave. So just to reiterate, access to public dollars for facilities will enable our communities to leverage resources and address the needs of our most vulnerable children and families, and also provide local community economic stimulus and construction trade business growth. You can read news and updates on the status of the capital fund at the link below, which we'll include in our chat. We do try to keep all timely information here, and this link will lead you to information about the application process that we will be addressing during this presentation, as well as family child care specific information. We will also share this along with the recording and the PowerPoint later this week. So let's dig into some grant uses. So grants will be available for the following uses: facility improvements and facility development and expansion. So facility improvements are small scale renovations and repairs to existing spaces that are necessary to address health and safety issues, make quality improvements, or reconfigure spaces to enhance capacity. The development and expansion use is for costs that are associated with the development of new high quality spaces, which includes planning and feasibility activities, new construction, major rehabilitation of vacant or blighted properties, and expansion to existing facilities. A reminder to home-based family childcare providers, due to these being public funds, we will be unable to support any expansions of residences. So the small scale renovations and repairs should be your focus to improve health, safety, and quality. And this is a reimbursement-based program. So if approved for grant funding, expenses must be approved, incurred, and paid for during the grant term prior to receiving the reimbursement. So we'll need evidence of expense and payment, such as invoices and canceled checks. Now we know that past grant programs had opportunity for advanced funds, but this program is reimbursement based. That said, if you are approved for funding to address an urgent and documented health and safety issue, you may be eligible to receive an advance of grant funds as long as you meet certain milestones in your project. LISC can and will work with you individually to determine if your project is eligible for that funding advance. So grant funds will be used to cover eligible costs that are associated with the design, construction, repair, renovation, rehabilitation, or other capital improvement or deferred maintenance of an eligible facility, such as, the preparation of reports, plans, engineering, specifications, or inspections. Also for construction, rehabilitation, expansion, demolition, and site work. For upgrading or conversion of
All right,
building
listen,
systems,
guys.
and costs
Yes,
for
I am
furniture,
trying to
fixtures, and equipment.
listen as we're doing things, so we need to
So looking at the two different types of uses we have, we can dig in a little bit more to facility improvement grants. Those are the ones that are meant to address the health and safety issues and enhance program quality. It should be based on documentation that you have in consultation from a regulating entity like DHS childcare licensing, or as part of a Bright Stars quality improvement plan that's, a result of an on-site visit. Some examples of improvements may include, but are not limited to, the repair and replacement of unsafe fencing, installation of fencing, the installation of safety egresses where it's required by health and safety, installation of safety surfacing under structures that are deemed in compliance with the Playground Safety Handbook, cost to remove unsafe equipment, the remediation or improvement of a direct facility related item that's a result of a compliance or regulatory visit, the purchase or installation of shade structures, the purchase or installation of hand washing sinks, the purchase and installation of storage and shelving. And again, this is the grant use for both childcare centers and home-based family childcare providers. If you are a family childcare provider, we can provide a list of potential projects that you might want to consider, and that will be part of the info packet that we send out later this week. So many of these are health and safety improvements, but at the same time, they can improve program quality by supporting children and teachers. And again, this is just an example of improvements. There are many more types of improvements that could be included with this use. So examples for the second use, which is the large scale expansion in the new site development, includes planning and feasibility, like professional architectural design services for feasibility and concept design, site analysis, engineering studies, legal services. If you're looking to develop a child care center as part of a mixed use building, funding will be determined based on costs associated with this child care center, not in total development. So if there are any CDCs or developers present on this call, feel free to reach out to us in the event that you are looking for a child care provider to partner with to expand. Other grant uses include site acquisition, which is the cost to purchase and prepare a property for childcare, for the construction of a new site, for a renovation of a newly purchased or leased site, for an expansion or addition to an existing site, for a large-scale renovation or retrofit of an existing site, and for a mixed-use development, which is, a land development that contains two or more major types of uses that would include childcare. Program grant resources only would fund the childcare portion. And so now I will kick it off to Megan Ressler, our program officer, as well as our contracts and management guru, who's going to talk a little bit more about our program eligibility.
Thanks, Erin. So as we mentioned, the rules and regulations that govern this program were recently finalized. The rules were subject to the State of Rhode Island's Office of Regulatory Reforms review process, and the Rhode Island Department of Human Services was required to follow that pretty rigorous process, requiring the regulations to be reviewed by ORR and go through a public comment period and then be reviewed by ORR again. And then DHS was required to respond to questions and make any necessary changes along the way. So as we mentioned, the process is now complete as of just a few days ago. I put in the chat a link to those rules and regulations on the Secretary of State's website. And now we're going to review some of the eligibility requirements that are outlined in those rules for you, along with some additional explanation that we hope will be helpful in assessing your own eligibility for this program. A note to just please make sure that you are meeting these requirements. Reach out to us if you're not sure about something. We don't want you to get too far along in this process, knowing that it does take time and resources from you. And then to find out that you're not meeting something and you have to take care of that. We want your timeline to flow as smoothly as possible. So these are important requirements that you should be sure you're meeting. So we'll start with the criteria for an early learning facilities project that would be eligible through this grant program. The regulations ask that applicants clearly demonstrate the following 4 areas that are bullet pointed on the slide in your proposal for this funding. These are the ways that you'll demonstrate that you are meeting project eligibility requirements. We're going to go through each of these in a little more detail. So the first item is a need for the project. So this is your project concept. It's a concise and compelling case for why you are proposing this project and what problem it will solve for. And this is for any size grant, whether you're looking for a small repair and renovation or a large scale expansion. All of these apply to both types of funding. So you can see here there are 3 broad categories to give you an example of why you might be taking on a project. You may be addressing a health and safety issue. And there is an example on the slide here of a provider operating in an older building who may need funding to address something like lead paint contamination, splintering flooring or handrails, poor ventilation, or unsafe or outdated play equipment. The next item is quality. Design features, layout, and equipment can improve program quality and contribute positively to child development. A well-designed and equipped space can also help support educators in a professional setting that meets their needs and the challenges, of caring for small children. There are a few examples here as well, like bathrooms, sinks, in or adjacent to classrooms, or your caregiving space. Toilets, sinks, and counters at child height, physically divided spaces, good natural light, adequate storage, and spaces for adults to plan, meet, have a break. These are all things that could impact the quality of your program. And I think I recognize some of those examples from what you all had put into that word cloud earlier. And lastly, we have expansion. For example, your program may be maintaining a very long wait list, so you may want to consider expanding your facility or expanding to a larger facility so that you can serve more families in your community. So your project concept is really important for gathering support, which is the last bullet that we'll talk about in a little bit. Support from families, funders, staff, and other stakeholders. Having people who support your ideas is really important. So you will need to speak to this in your program's application process. So here's some additional guidance for how you might share the need for the proposed project. And this information that's on the screen here now is particularly important for if you're planning an expansion of an existing program or the development of a new facility. It will also help with the second item on our list of things to demonstrate. A market study is an important component of planning for your expansion project. Who is your target market? What is the existing supply like? And given that information, how many children can you reasonably expect to enroll in your facility? So we have listed some potential sources of information here. We have census data, the Rhode Island Kids Count Fact Book. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that, and it's so helpful and has so much great data that you could use. The ECCE website, the LISC 2019 Facilities Needs Assessment, which we shared the link to earlier. It's on our website. And you can also reach out to providers in the area you're seeking to serve. Ask if they are fully enrolled, if they have a wait list, and if they do, what does that look like? And also important would be to survey parents in the area. What are their needs, and are they being met by other providers in the community? You might find that you can meet needs where other providers in the area may not. Again, thinking about a market study, how many children will be served, from what age groups, what are the particular needs of the community you're looking in, and how are you going to fulfill them? And what will distinguish you? So what's going to give you that competitive advantage? And we have a few examples of questions to consider as part of that process. Are you going to offer space for priority populations like infant and toddlers? Will you have any special features, for example, like a parent resource room, or will you be doing a gardening green space program? Are you collaborating with any local organizations to offer additional supports or services? The third bullet here is a financial need for assistance in the form of grant funding for the project to be feasible. A note here, if an award is made, the amount of the award will be based on the demonstrated amount required to fulfill the financial need with grant funds. So it won't necessarily be the requested amount. We're going to be walking through an example of what that could look like in just a moment. And here we've pulled the language from the rules and regulations that speaks to leverage requirements, which in this particular program, a leverage requirement is that the grantee that's receiving grant funds bring additional resources in addition to this grant to fully fund the cost of their proposed project. We talked about the two types of grant uses, the repair and renovation of existing sites, and then the larger scale expansion for the development of new spaces. The regulations actually split that leverage requirement into those two different pools. So it's a slightly different requirement for each. So for the eligible projects involving improvement of existing early learning facilities, so those are the renovation and repairs to meet health and safety quality, or reconfiguration of space. It says program fund or early learning facilities in that category should leverage funds in addition to the program grant that is being requested. So you'll notice that the language of this says it should leverage. We know that that's not always possible, but we want to highlight that while it's not must leverage, as we'll see in the next example, that we want to just let you know that it will be factored into the program priorities for decision making. So it will strengthen your proposal if you are able to bring matching funds to complete your project. So if you look at the second requirement here, and this is applying to the expansion of existing facilities or creation of new facilities, you must leverage funds in addition to these grant funds. So this program's grant funding cannot be used to support the full cost of an expansion project. So you will need to seek out other sources of financing. Related to demonstrating a financial need for grant funding and demonstrating leverage, you should show you have a plan for how you will get the funds to complete the project, a reasonable plan. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to LISC Rhode Island Senior Program Officer for Lending and Capacity Building, Jay O'Grady, and he will help walk through this requirement with an example of how to assess minimum grant amount necessary for project feasibility.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me, Megan? Just give a thumbs up if you can. Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. As Megan just said, my name is Jay O'Grady. I'm the Senior Program Officer here in LISC Rhode Island, principally responsible for lending and capacity building grants and things of that nature. So as Megan mentioned, the regulations for this particular source require that that projects bring additional financing to the table, and the purpose there is to maximize the stretch of these grant resources. Right, we want to make sure that we can support as many new projects as possible, bring as many new early learning seats online as possible with what is really a limited supply of capital at our disposal to do so. So essentially what we are going to be doing is grant sizing based on the applications that you file. And so as part of the application that you file for grant support, you will be required to submit to us a project operating budget. So in other words, you will be asked to talk about the number of seats that will be in your facility, the expected revenues that those seats will generate. You'll be asked to estimate operating costs associated with that new facility. And in so doing, we will be able to make an assessment of that project's ability to carry commercial debt. And we will size the grant amount based on that exercise. It is a proxy. There's not an assumption that you will in fact go out and seek commercial debt to fill that gap. You don't need to. Perhaps you could find some other source to fill that gap, or perhaps there's resources within your organization to fill that gap, or whatever the case may be. But we will be using this type of calculation to determine what the appropriate grant size will be. So I've just put up here a couple of examples that I'll walk through, and again, these are for illustration purposes only. So if you look at on the left-hand side, you'll see an initial what's entitled initial underwriting. So let's say that your project, again, just for illustration purposes, will cost $100,000. And you are bringing to the table $10,000 worth of owner's equity. This is before you even get to a grant. And that would require you, absent any grant or any other source, filling that gap with $90,000 of commercial debt. So you look below to see how feasible that is, right? So this new facility will generate $30,000 in new tuition revenue, offset by $25,000 in operating costs, leaving you at the end of the day with $5,000 in net operating income, from which you could, in theory, pay debt service on that $90,000. But as you look below, assuming you have a 6% interest rate, assuming the loan in question is a fully amortized 20-year loan, you would be required to make annual debt service payments of roughly $7,800 a year. And Megan's response to the chat has popped up, blocking my ability to see there we go, gone away. As you can see, the $5,000 of net operating income that that this project would bring to the table is insufficient to meet that annual debt service payment. And so instead, we would take a project like this and we would size it in such a way that it could, in fact, meet debt service obligations through the addition of capital grant dollars. So moving to the right-hand side of the column, We see again the same project costing $100,000 in development costs. Again, we see that there's $10,000 of owner's equity being brought to the table, and we see again the same numbers. Expected tuition of $30,000 a year, offset by expected operating costs of $5,000 a year, leaving net operating income available to service debt of $5,000. And so what we calculate here is an annual debt payment that results in that bottom line number of debt service coverage ratio of 1.27, which just means that you have 127%. The net operating income number of 5,000 represents 127% of your annual debt service payment. And we would essentially look to size loans such that the net operating income number is at least at a bare minimum 120% of the annual debt service payment. We'd like to push it a little higher, perhaps even, up to, in this case, the example is 1.27, but we might want to push that as high as 1.4, just because we know that over time your costs are going to increase, and your tuition is not necessarily going to while your tuition revenue will increase as well, it's not necessarily going to increase at the same pace as your operating costs. And so we want to make sure that in year one that your debt service coverage ratio number down the bottom is sufficient so that it will always be above 1.2 throughout the course of your estimated 20-year loan. So this may be gobbledygook to folks that aren't intimately familiar with the way loans are sized or how financing works, but the point is that in this case, that debt service payment of roughly $3,900 a year is what you would get if you took a loan for $45,000, again, 20-year fully amortized loan at 6%. And so that leaves a gap of $45,000, which we would then fill with a grant from this particular grant source. And so that's generally how we would look at sizing your grant awards. We would do a calculation like this. We're not asking you to do this calculation, but you're going to supply us just in the application that you do provide, you're going to supply us with the key numbers, which are the top number, development cost, the middle operating numbers, which is tuition revenue and operating costs. And then we're going to make a calculation. We'll fill in the rest, and we'll make a calculation to determine, just what the size of the capital grant would need to be in order to make sure that that you are meeting, that we're achieving sustainable financials for the organization over a 20-year period of time. So the only thing that I would stress here is be realistic about your tuition estimates, because if you estimate too high, and maybe folks are maybe feel like there's an incentive to estimate high tuition revenues because you want to make your project appear very strong from a financial perspective. If you do estimate if you're overly optimistic in your tuition revenues, it may affect the size of your grant, is what I'm saying, because it will increase your net operating income number, and it'll make it look like your project can support more debt than it might actually be able to. I'm sure there are questions that will be generated from this, but I wanted to walk you through that. And then I'm not sure, Megan, if there's another slide for me to address here. If not, I want to just address one thing that I saw in the chat a little while ago. As Erin mentioned, this is a reimbursable grant scenario. So this requires that the developer not only incur costs, but also pay for those costs and be able to prove that those costs have been paid before reimbursement can be sought from this particular grant source. Now, for smaller operators of early learning centers, that's a burden, right? It's a burden to float those costs, to float those expenses ahead of time while waiting for reimbursement. And we'll do everything we can to make sure that that reimbursement is done on an expedited basis, but we're still looking at, weeks, not days, between, when your requisitions are submitted and when dollars are returned to you. So you do have a couple of options, right? So probably the worst option is to put those expenses on some sort of credit card at 20+% annual interest rate. But I am happy to say that LISC should be able to provide, and in fact, we're working on a way to do this in sort of a wraparound, painless fashion. We should be able to provide you with bridge financing so that we can, under this scenario, essentially provide you money to float those expenses until they're reimbursed from the state. And talk to us more after the fact if when we get to that point. But keep in mind that we should be able to offer that, and it should be at a pretty inexpensive cost, particularly relative to some of the other choices that are out there. Happy to pause here for questions or answer any offline. And hearing none, I'm not sure if there are any in the chat, but at this point, I'll turn it back to Megan. But Megan, please redirect me if there are questions that are appropriate for me to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so back to our what is an eligible early learning facilities project. The last item on our list is local support for the project. It's helpful to have helpful to project success to have and be able to demonstrate the support. So in your application, you will be asked to talk about this. So I've included here a few examples of where you may want to seek out support, both internally and externally. Internally, you can look to staff, board members if you are a nonprofit, or if you're doing a large project, you may want to consider forming a group of advisors if you're a for-profit. Parents, of course, and families. And then in the external network, funders like LISC, professionals who will volunteer as advisors, elected officials, and contractors. Moving into the eligible facility category, the eligible facility here means building, structure, or site that will be owned, leased, or otherwise occupied by one or more eligible organizations who are licensed by DHS or an LEA. All eligible facilities have to demonstrate that they are serving or committed to serving low-income families with a public subsidy, which would mean, Child Care Assistance Program, CCAP, a federal Head Start, or other kind of similar sources. Leased facilities, I know someone asked about this in the chat. They do have to have a lease term of no less than 20 years, including options that would add up to the 20 years. We know this is a long-term lease. However, because this is public funding, state funding, that this is the way that we were able to include leased facility renovations as an eligible use of funds. No applications will be considered without a written assurance. The property owner basically understands the regulations, and that if a grant is awarded, there will be a lease your lease will be able to support that 20-year period in the event that a grant is awarded. So I am going to share the template for that property owner's assurances form that we'll be looking for as part of any application. And then what is an eligible organization? This is our last eligibility category. So the two types of eligible organizations would be a childcare provider that's demonstrating a commitment to provide early childhood care and education to low-income families with a public subsidy. Oh, sorry. A developer or community-based organization. So it's a for-profit or nonprofit developer who's partnered with or is committed to partnering with one of those eligible childcare providers. And if a developer or community-based organization is applying, we may request evidence like a memorandum of understanding between the developer and childcare provider to demonstrate that commitment. So all eligible organizations, regardless of what type you are, you must provide a unique entity ID, and that's in SAM because the government recently switched from DUNS to SAM. So everyone needs to sign up for their unique entity ID on sam.gov. We do have a how-to video and a step-by-step quick guide for anyone who does still need to do that. I'm going to pop that into the chat right now. So there's a video and a step-by-step guide. And then you must be operating in good standing in the state of Rhode Island, as well as with Rhode Island DHS childcare licensing. And in good standing with licensing means early care and education programs are currently free of any pending investigations or any pending or past legal actions or other actions that call into question the capacity to care for children in a manner that ensures their safety. And that determination will be made at the discretion of Rhode Island DHS childcare licensing. Now we're going to look at program priorities. So going back to that question about a minimum percentage of student population that must be low income, as Erin mentioned, while there's no minimum, that will be something that may be given preference. So $13 million is a lot. And as Jay mentioned, while it is a lot, it is a limited pool of funds. It's a huge investment that we haven't seen before in our state for facilities improvements. It's the result of lots of work for over many years, research, planning, and advocacy of many folks on this call. And I think I saw Cindy Larson on the call, so I want to give her a shout out. She's the former Deputy Director of LISC Rhode Island and founding director of the Rhode Island Child Care and Early Learning Facilities Fund. While she's taken all of that work to the national level, she's still here supporting Rhode Island as well. So quick shout out to her for that. And we know there are many important and worthwhile projects out there. Given that, and we anticipate our application requests will exceed what is available. So we have, with DHS, established these program priorities so that we can ensure resources are expended efficiently and in a way that most positively impacts the intended beneficiaries. So again, it's the first priority would be the level to which the project improves access to early childhood care and education in underserved communities. So that's the community question. And then also the level to which the applicant has demonstrated commitment to serving families with public subsidy. The third is including development of space for infants and toddlers who are a priority population. The fourth is proposing matching funding for the project, and we may ask for evidence of that matching funding, like bank statements to demonstrate. And again, that requirement is a must for our large scale expansion projects, and for our smaller repair and renovation grants, that will just be given preference if you're able to provide matching funding, but we know that is a challenge for sure. And then lastly, solicits or includes participation of businesses certified by the State Office of Diversity, Equity, and Opportunity. So you can visit that office Diversity, Equity, and Opportunity website for a database of certified businesses. I will share that link. Basically, what we're looking to see here is that there is an equitable process in place for getting estimates for a proposed grant-funded project from architects, contractors, consultants, other businesses like that. And I will just quickly drop that link into this chat. And while we talked about the types of projects that may be given preference in scoring, we also wanted to share some examples of not things that are like necessarily not eligible, but those projects that in the case that we need to be making those priority decisions may fall lower on the list. So we know, this whole thing takes a lot of time and effort and on your part. So we don't want, if there are projects that would better meet the priorities of this funding, if you're thinking about something that might fall into one of these categories, we want to work with you to make sure that you're going with the project that would have a better chance of getting funded. So that's why in a lot of our grant programs, we ask or we make the suggestion that people reach out for technical assistance and guidance prior to starting any application process. And same here, we want to hear from you, work with you. I believe I dropped the form to request technical assistance in the chat. And that would be prior to applying, and we'll continue to provide that TA throughout. It's also a reason why, which you'll see in a few minutes, that the first step in this process for you would be an initial letter of intent or interest, which would just be a brief overview of your project prior to being given approval to move to that next stage of the electronic application. So we have landlord responsibilities and lease spaces. We know this can be a little blurry, and in some cases, leases do put responsibilities onto the lessee that would usually maybe be considered a landlord responsibility. So in that case, it is your responsibility and is a good project, but just be sure you know kind of what that is. And again, reach out to us if you have questions. No long-term site control. So this goes back to our leased space requirements. There's no detail or approved plan, or your plan doesn't align with best practice. This would just, again, be another opportunity for technical assistance. We can work with you, work with your designer to see how we can collectively make this, improve that process. Low or no high needs children served. So as we said in the priorities, the level to which you are serving high needs children will be considered. And then if you're not able to demonstrate the capacity to manage the project, you do need like a great team to support a facility project, large and small. And because this is a government funding source, there are some requirements that we'll get into as far as reporting that you need to meet. And then fiscal issues. As far as fiscal issues, I just want to note, we understand that you as childcare providers do operate on very, very thin margins. So what we are looking for here and why we will be asking for business financials and cash flow projections to project out your revenue and expenses is that overall, over a period of time, that your program is able to demonstrate your finances will allow you to continue providing the quality care that you want to provide. We know some months won't look that great, some years won't look as good as others. We just want to see that kind of long-term overall picture of fiscal health. And then home expansions, as mentioned by Erin, we are unable to fund additions to residences. That's due to the funding source here, the public funding source. It's not that this wouldn't potentially be a great and worthwhile project for your particular space and the goals of your program. Again, it's just not something we can fund here with the government funds. So we want to kind of steer folks away from requests that involve home additions, and we know that impacts our family child care home providers. So we just want to encourage you to apply for those repair and renovation projects to improve health, safety, quality, or potentially do a reconfiguration of your existing space. And then one last item on large climbing structures. I know that, that this comes up a lot. So we're talking about, as pictured here, like the traditional post and platform kind of structures. We don't typically prioritize this type of project because for one, they're not required by regulation, and two, they're not necessary for best practice in outdoor play. Again, just like home expansions, we're not saying that this couldn't be a great addition to your particular space and the goals that you have for your kids. It's just not likely to raise up in priority through this program. All right, so now the good stuff, we're going to turn it over to Pauline to walk us through the application and decision-making process. Please keep your questions coming. We'll do our best to answer them as we go.
Oh, thank you, Megan. I happen to be looking at all the participants today, and I recognize so many providers that we've worked with, and especially myself over the last few years. And I'm really pleased to be working with the team on this really new, exciting opportunity for the childcare community. So to start, I just want to provide just a basic overview of the application process. And there are 3 key steps. Some of them we've covered already, but it's always good to sort of reinforce them. Step 1, of course, is to determine your eligibility. Step 2 is to submit a letter of intent. And then step 3 will be to complete the electronic application or access additional technical assistance. So I want to sort of reiterate again to review all of our eligibility requirements first. And if you have any questions, please reach out to the child care team. That's what we're here for. And, that is what we do best. I should say, one of the things that we do best. We do a lot of good things best. So members of the child care team, which would be myself, Deanna Bruno and Nati Travaris, we will be supporting Erin and Megan on reviewing the additional initial information and communicating with you if it's something very simple that we need. But if there's anything that's a little bit more technical, we will definitely be commuting with Erin and Megan, and they will be in touch with you for that technical assistance and additional information. So once you've passed go with your letter of intent, you will then be accepted into filling out the online grant, application. One comment that I'd like to make is that the earlier you are in, the more likely you will have access to the funding. It's a first come, first serve. So start planning if you haven't already. We'd like to see you with projects that are well thought out, fully baked, as they say, addressing the funding priorities and all of the other eligibility requirements. And as we move through the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about the available of resources to you. So I want to mention again that the template for the LOI is out on our website, and that this particular step is going to be the sort of initial, let me step back. It's the sort of abbreviated description of your project, and it's going to be the initial assessment of fit with the resources that we have available to you. So it's starting off, on the right foot. So Megan, I think the next one is talking a little bit more about the letter of intent. So we want to emphasize that all providers should complete the LOI regardless of what kind of project you have, whether it's large or whether it's small. And as we mentioned earlier, the LOI must be submitted and approved in order to move forward with the general online application. So if you notice in the slide, we have the email address that when you've completed the LOI, you would submit it to us. And the good thing is that this one is really only 2 to 3 pages. We'll be asking for the Bible, like later on, once you've passed this step and you go on to the general online applications. So the LOIs will be accepted on a rolling basis. And as we continue through the presentation, you'll see the decision-making schedule and the dates and whatever to give you a sense of how they're going to be approved. Full proposals are not accepted at this point in the process. So what we're saying is LOIs first. Once you've been reviewed and approved to move to the next step, then you'll get the online application. So, and to reiterate, it's just an abbreviated description of your project. And this is how LISC and DHS is going to do the initial assessment to determine what your next step will be. So if you notice on the right-hand side of the screen, there's several criteria to help you determine what information we're going to be looking for in the LOI. I won't go read through all of the information, but just to highlight them briefly, it's a brief summary statement, a statement of need, and I believe we've talked about that already, and as well as a description of your project activity. The outline of the project, what is the measurable impact, your capacity to complete the project. And I think that's an important piece of information that would be very beneficial in your LOI. A budget, sort of a general description of what the budget funding is going to require. And of course, your contact name and contact information, along with your signature. So as always, I always like to reiterate that, the LISC team is here to answer any of your questions. And I noticed the questions that are coming through today. They're great. And I know we're giving you a lot of information, and fortunately, all of this resource will be available to you so that you can digest it, as we go through the process. And look for that LOI on the website.
And I just popped it into the chat a few minutes ago too.
Great. Okay.
In English and Spanish.
Excellent. Okay. And then next up, I think, is the decision-making process. So, and again, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how the applications are going to be reviewed and the awards approved. So there will be 3 steps. So the online application will first be reviewed by the LISC staff to ensure basic eligibility and completeness. Goes back to what we've been saying throughout the whole presentation. This is probably a very key element that we want to emphasize to you. So eligible complete applications will then be released to the review committee, which will evaluate each application based on a scoring rubric. They will then assign a score, and that will determine the funding recommendation. So I know there's some questions that came through about how much money are the grants going to be, that sort of thing. That will be determined by this particular process. So at the end, DHS will be the ones that will give the final award approval based on the results from the committee meeting. So then, in addition to meeting the eligibility requirements and scoring based on the scoring rubric, the selections are also going to be based on these 3 elements: clarity and completeness, possibly a site assessment by the LISC staff or a consultant. We may do that virtually. We may come to the site and visit you in person. And then finally, obviously, the availability, of funding. So disclaimer here, the decision for acceptance of LOIs and grant applications will be made at the discretion of LISC Rhode Island Child Care and Early Learning Facilities Fund, and that's in partnership with our friends at DHS. And again, reiterating, to make sure your application is the basic eligibility and everything is complete, because if not, what will happen is it could possibly hold up your LOI. The LOI could hold up your online application for further review, and we'll have to wait for additional documentation. And then that just jeopardizes the final approval for potential funding. So next, I think, Megan, you're up to give a review on the decision-making criteria for us.
Thank you. So a copy of this rubric is going to be provided when we send out all of our materials, which I think someone asked in the chat when you can expect that, and we're aiming to get it out by the end of this week, if not sooner. So we want to walk through the sections of the rubric really quickly. You can look through it. So the first section and the overall rubric is you can be awarded up to 100 points. So this first section, project and organizational readiness, is for a maximum of 50 points. So you're going to want to demonstrate a need for the project and have a feasible and complete plan for its success. You have to show that you're able to sustain the project as well as your overall everyday operations, and that you have sought out and can demonstrate local support for your project. The next one will be the technical proposal, and that's for a maximum of 35 points. So first you have demonstration of having a measurable and specific impact on the affected community's access to high quality childcare for low-income families. You have to demonstrate accurate costs. So your budget should reflect sound business practices, that the costs you're indicating are based on professional estimates, and that you're incorporating any findings from, regulatory visits or assessments. For example, a licensing consultation with childcare licensing. And then lastly, that the application clearly demonstrates a financial need, which is what Jay had previously walked through with us. And then lastly, we have some of our other priorities, which we've discussed. I think we already went through these, and you can go through when we send this out to you.
So here is a quick snapshot for each phase of the grant program. The first is the application process. That's where you can submit your letter of intent, fill out your application submission. That's where the committee will review and create a decision-making process. And that's where applicants will also be notified of the grant award status. The next phase is the notice of award. So for those that then get to move on and have been awarded a grant, you will complete a W-9 form. You will provide a direct deposit authorization, and then you'll submit any additional documentation as requested to ensure eligibility and compliance. Then you'll move to the grant agreement process. So after you've applied and have been awarded and submitted all of your documentation, LISC will begin writing a contract agreement, and we will send a written grant agreement to you. And that will include the grant scope, the budget, the terms and conditions. You will review and sign back to us, and then we will provide a fully executed copy of the agreement. And then you're in the fun phase, which is the grant funded project period. So eligible expenses incurred for grant funded work completed during this time period and after the fully executed agreement is in place can be approved for reimbursement. And if funding is provided for capital expenses like hiring contractors for construction or renovation, that work must begin within 1 year of the date of the fully executed grant agreement. And then after the grant funded project period where you actually conduct the work, we have a period of closeout. So all grant funded work, invoicing, reporting, and reimbursements must be complete by the grant term end date, and that will be noted in your grant agreement. And the absolute final deadline for this program to close out is October 31st. So just to note, we cannot reimburse any previously incurred expenses, only those incurred during the grant term, which will begin once a fully executed contract is in place, which means it's signed by both the grantee and LISC, can be covered. So if there is any work that's being done now or updates that are happening now, unfortunately, those would not qualify for reimbursement for this particular program. And also to note, I know somebody asked about timeline. The bond program closes out on October 31st, but your specific timeline and grant award term is going to be based on the project schedule that you submit with your application. So if you have a project that is set to conclude December of next year, then the grant term would be awarded as such to meet the intent of the project program. Okay, so I think with that, we can move on to grant reporting requirements.
All righty, thanks, Erin. Now that you've been awarded the funding, okay, here comes the best part, and that's the financial reporting, and that's everyone's favorite. And if anyone has that little reaction button down at the bottom of their screen and they want to just do a thumbs up saying how much they like their financial reporting, let us know. So, but seriously, given the source of the funding, it is required that all of the awardees keep accurate records of their expenditures and proof of any payments that you have made. And I think Erin mentioned that earlier about checks and statements and that sort of thing. And this shows to us that you are complying with the terms and conditions of the grant award. So on the slide here, there's 3 key items that all awardees should remember, when they receive their award, and how they can kind of keep track of all the information that we're looking for. So the first one would be to maintain records to demonstrate the use of the funds. And that, of course, is the signed agreements for the grant funded work, invoices, receipts, canceled checks, bank statements, as we've said, provide and maintain financial reports of the revenue and expenditures of the grant funds, and provide and maintain records of signed financial reports for each disbursement request, so that it's certifying that the uses of the funds are true and accurate, and are in accordance with the terms and conditions of the grant award. And then next we go on to the other favorite requirement that we do, and that's project reporting. And for some of our providers who may not have, say, in-house accountants or administrators or whatever, and a lot of that could be our family child care centers, it just might be helpful, and it's just a suggestion that I'm putting forth, that you just have a separate binder or a filing system where you can keep all the records so that you'll have easy reference to them. So, and the key thing about the project updates, that it helps us to help you, because at some point, you may need guidance with contractors, or perhaps you're having difficulties meeting project deadlines, or there's a slowdown in receiving materials and supplies. That we're here to help you, and the sooner we know about it or we're aware of it, the easier it is to keep your project, on track. So again, the 4 elements there are to provide monthly written project updates and comply with requests for additional information regarding the project activities, maintain and provide records that anyone hired, and this is kind of a key point here, such as contractors, designers, and engineers with grant that you're hiring with the grant funding, that they have gone through a competitive application process, and including the rationale or reasoning behind all of your hiring decisions. So, and of course, you would need to maintain and provide signed agreements with the contractors and architects and designers, and also to allow LISC and DHS to do site visits, when requested. And you may come a point where you will request us to come down and take a look at the work that you're doing, and we're more than happy to do that.
So I think we can move to the next section, which is about our resources. So for those of you who know LISC and our facilities fund, we're not just here's your money and go away. We really do try to enter into relationships with our providers in a, we call it a 3-pronged approach, where we have technical assistance and training and funding. So we do offer other tools and resources to support early planning and pre-development. We just gave you a whole bunch of information, and even I'm overwhelmed, and we've been, working on this for what feels like years at this point. If you don't feel quite ready to take on a project, that's okay. We do have lots of different resources available, and you can contact us at whatever stage of the project that you are in. So if you are in this process and you're just considering starting kind of an expansion project of some kind, just contact us. We have an electronic form, a TA application that you can complete. LISC technical assistance is also available in Spanish as well. So if you would like interpretation or translation services, we can help provide that for you. In addition, we have a facilities project readiness worksheet. We have a site evaluation checklist. We have a space planning worksheet. We have planning grant resources, and then there are also loans and recoverable grants. So we try to meet you wherever you're at. So moving to the next slide, we have planning grant opportunities. LISC does offer a small competitive pool of private funds. They can be used to secure professionals, to plan for and assess the feasibility of indoor and outdoor space. And then funds that are used through the Child Care Facilities Fund are open to both nonprofit and for-profit corporations in Rhode Island. You can contact us and we can provide you with the funding guidelines around those. And then from time to time, we get special, grant programs available to us to push through some funds. So we recently closed the preschool development grant. That was one that was for architectural planning. It could be that sometime during this grant term, there may be other special opportunities that pop up for funding sources like that. And then I was going to pass it along to Jay O'Grady, but I think he had to hop off. So I will quickly talk about LISC loans and recoverable grants. We do have two different types of funding sources available that may be helpful to you to think about, how you're going to be servicing debt if necessary for your project in order to understand the calculation for how much grant award that you need. So we do have recoverable grants that can be used. Those operate kind of like a, low or zero interest type loan for pre-development costs. And then we also have typical standard loans. And here are just some things about the eligible borrowers who are allowed, the interest rates, the product term that we might have, and then what potential loan fees are. If you are interested in a loan, just reach out to us and then we can connect you with our lender to discuss other opportunities and options for that. And, thank goodness, because I think, yes, this is the last slide of our presentation. Just as a reminder, this session has been recorded and we will share it with you via email. And then we will also share along our PowerPoint presentations. The recording will be in English, but the PowerPoint is available in Spanish. And if you did request a hard copy, we are in the process of getting those mailed out to you. So if you don't have it yet, it should be forthcoming. But anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. If you have any final questions, let us know. Otherwise, at this point, you can feel free to leave this meeting, but we will stay on for a few more minutes in the event that there are any additional questions. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing your letters of intent soon.